The family sent the infertile daughter to the rancher as a joke, but she came back with a child. Colorado Territory, 1885. The sun had barely begun to dip when the shouting started. Dust hung in the still air outside the gable farmhouse, and the scent of dry hay clung to the walls like a ghost refusing to leave. Elira stood in the parlor, hands clenched at her sides, shoulders trembling beneath a modest dress that no longer fit like it used to. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together. Across from her, her mother's voice rose, sharp as broken glass. 2 years married, and not a single child to show for it, she spat. You think we raised you for this? To be sent back like spoiled milk? Her father, Mr. Gable, sat heavily in the corner chair, arms folded across his chest. His stare cut through her. You came home empty-handed, no dowry, no grandchild, nothing but disgrace. You are a shadow, they returned with a stamp on it. Useless. Elira blinked quickly, but the tears still slipped out. She did not speak. She had tried, once, when they dragged her off the wagon after her husband's family shoved her out without ceremony. But they did not want her words, only results. Her mother turned her back for a moment, muttering curses under her breath, then spun around again. Do you know how many tongues wagged at church last Sunday? She demanded. They said your husband's family celebrated the divorce, said he already had a new girl lined up. You ruined your chance at a future. Elira flinched. Mama, I did not. Quiet, her father barked. You think we care to hear excuses? Your womb failed, girl. That is all they will ever remember. No man wants a wife who cannot carry a name forward. Her mother took a folded letter from the mantel and shoved it into Elira's hands. Jonas Halden, she said. He owns cattle, land, no family, no children. He needed hands to help with the fence, and we offered you. It clears the debt and clears this house of your shame. Elira stared at the paper. It was not a letter of affection. It was a transaction. You are sending me away? She whispered. You think we can afford to keep you here? Feed you, clothe you, protect your reputation when you already broke it? Her father growled. I am your daughter. You are a burden, he said. The room fell silent. Outside, a wagon pulled up. The driver did not knock. He only waited. Elira stood motionless. Then, slowly, she lifted the small travel sack she had not yet unpacked from her return 2 weeks ago. It held no keepsakes. Just a dress, some underthings, and a single Bible with the corners curled. Will he be at the church? She asked, voice hollow. Her mother sneered. He is not coming. Sent the wagon. That should tell you enough. As Elira stepped outside, her father called after her, not unkindly, but with finality. Do not come back. She climbed into the wagon. The road was long and quiet. The sun dropped low behind the hills, and her hands turned cold despite the heat. By the time they arrived at the Halden Ranch, it was near dark. A young ranch hand helped her down with a nod and pointed toward the house. She knocked once, and the door creaked open. Jonas Halden stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, with wind-worn eyes and a shirt rolled at the sleeves. He looked at her for a moment, then stepped aside. Rooms down the hall. First door on the left, he said. No welcome, no smile. Elira walked past him into the house that smelled of dust and coffee and distance. The door shut behind her with a soft thud. That night, she sat alone on the edge of a strange bed. The moonlight barely reached the floorboards. No ceremony, no words, no promise. Just silence. She looked down at her hands and whispered, I am a wife. But it feels like I have just been delivered, like a debt marked paid. The wind changed direction 2 days after Elira arrived at the Halden Ranch. The nights turned colder, the air brittle with the promise of early frost. She rose before the sun, tied her apron, and kept her eyes on the ground. She cooked, she cleaned, she scrubbed the floors, and washed clothes by the creek until her knuckles split from the cold, and all the while she moved like a ghost, seen but never heard. Jonas Halden did not speak much either. He rose early, worked late, and when he came into the house, he washed his hands at the basin, ate quietly, and nodded once before disappearing down the hall. They spoke only when necessary. "Salt's on the left. You forgot your gloves. There's more firewood out back." Elira did not mind the silence. It was better than questions, better than pity. She kept her sleeves long to hide the red cracks in her skin. She mended his shirts with neat, invisible stitches. She boiled lard and lavender into a balm for the horse's legs, never once thinking to use it on her own. Then, one morning, a small box appeared on the table. Inside it, a pair of soft leather gloves, perfectly sized for her hands. No note, no explanation. She said nothing. Later that week, she found a clean cloth folded on her pillow, not one of hers. It smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar. Her name was stitched into the corner. And then, on a Thursday, when her hands were bleeding from scrubbing the porch, she found a tin of salve by the basin, strong, cool, and wrapped in brown paper. When she glanced up, Jonas was outside chopping wood, his back turned, as if he had never seen her limp. Still, she did not speak of it. She wore the gloves. She used the salve. She folded the cloth and kept it in her apron. "In town," the whispers began. "She's the one that got sent back, right? The barren one. Must be nice, trading shame for land." At first, Elira's chest tightened when she heard them. Then it dulled, like stepping barefoot onto frozen ground, the sting giving way to numbness. The worst part was that no one even bothered to lower their voices. She passed two women by the general store one afternoon, and one of them leaned close to the other with a laugh. "I hear she sleeps in a different room. Figures. Who'd want to share a bed with damaged goods?" Elira kept walking. That night, she scrubbed the cast-iron pan so hard the black came off. Her hands shook. She dropped the cloth into the sink and pressed her palms against the counter. She had come here expecting silence, but she had not expected to feel small again, like she had in that other house, beneath that other roof, where they stared at her with eyes full of judgment and mouths full of curses. She thought perhaps Jonas had heard the rumors. He must have. But he said nothing. He did not defend her. He did not correct them. He did not touch her, ask her questions, or show her even the polite gestures a husband might offer his bride. And yet, every evening, the boots she left by the door were cleaned. The kettle was already warming when she rose. And on her worst day, when she left her apron out on the fence, it was brought back inside, neatly folded on the table. She once found a fresh bar of soap wrapped in linen on the windowsill. A small gesture, almost nothing. But she stood there for 5 whole minutes, staring at it. Elira did not cry. She had done enough of that. But that night, she added one more log to the fire before Jonas came in. She set out an extra spoon beside his bowl of stew. And she waited. She did not know what for, but she waited. The market smelled of rain-damp wood and autumn apples. Elira moved quietly between stalls, her basket light, her gaze lower still. She avoided conversation, as always. But fate did not care for her silence. Near the grain sacks, a voice cut through the air. "Well now, Elira Gable, or is it Halden now?" She turned. A woman in a blue bonnet smiled with the sharpness of a blade. Her name was Miriam Crowley, a cousin to her former sister-in-law. "You're looking well," Miriam added, tone falsely sweet. "Your husband's doing better too. Married again, you know. Pretty girl, sturdy. The kind who looks like she can bear children." The words stung sharper than a slap. Elira smiled weakly, the kind that barely reached her lips. She gripped the edge of her basket so tightly the weave bit into her fingers. "Wish him well for me," she said, and walked away before the burn behind her eyes could spill. That night, it all came back, louder than the wind outside, louder than her own breath in the dark. The other house, the medicine cabinet, the tin cups lined up each morning filled with tinctures and powders and fertility drafts. The days she was told not to lift heavy pots, not to drink cold water, not to read after sunset, the calendar marked in red, the shame of every new month that arrived empty, and her mother-in-law, with her cold voice and colder hands. "If you cannot give him a child, what are you good for?" Not once did they question the son. Not once did they ask him to see a doctor. It was Elira who was sent to tests, poked, prodded, whispered about behind doors that never fully closed. And on the final day, the day she was sent home like a parcel gone sour, the last thing she heard was her mother-in-law's voice screaming down the hallway. "You're a dry well, girl. A disgrace. May you never poison another house again." Elira woke from the memory gasping, drenched in sweat. Her hands were clenched tight around the edge of the quilt. She lay still for a long time, waiting for the ghosts to fade. The next morning, she kept herself busy, split kindling, stacked firewood, carried buckets, anything to keep her thoughts away. But when the chickens broke loose from the coop, squawking and flapping in a frenzy, her last ounce of patience snapped. She managed to corral them back, but the noise, the mess, the damn silence of her own pain, it became too much. She sank down in the corner of the coop, back against the rough boards. Her shoulders shook, though no sound came out. It was not the kind of crying one learns as a girl, loud and hot and seeking comfort. This was the quiet cry of a woman who had swallowed too much grief to scream anymore. It choked in her throat, it cracked in her chest. A shadow stretched across the dirt. She did not look up, but she felt him there. Jonas. He stood just beyond the wire, not entering, not demanding. His voice came low, steady. "You want a few days to rest? Forget the chickens, forget the ranch, forget what folks say. Just rest." "What?" She looked up then. Her eyes were swollen, but dry. Her lips parted, but no answer came. And Jonas, he did not look at her the way the others did. Not like a broken thing. Not like a problem to solve. He looked at her like a person, like a woman who deserved space, to grieve, to heal, to simply exist without explaining herself. He nodded once and walked away. That evening, Elira washed up slowly, her hands still trembling. She diced carrots, peeled potatoes, stirred beef into thick broth, the motions grounding her. Jonas did not mention what he had seen, but when she set the plate down in front of him, she paused. Her eyes held his for a moment longer than usual, and in that silence, there was something like understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close. The sun was sharp above the rooftops when Jonas and Elira arrived in town. The streets were busier than usual. Wagons creaked along the road, voices drifted from shop fronts, and children chased each other through the dust. Elira kept close to Jonas, her eyes low as they approached the mercantile. She clutched the burlap list of goods, reading over it again even though she'd memorized every word. Just as Jonas stepped inside, Elira turned toward the well, needing a moment to breathe. That was when she heard it, a woman shouting, "James! No, wait, James!" A small boy, no more than 4, darted across the road. He was chasing a paper kite, its tail fluttering madly in the wind. His little boots slipped in the gravel as he laughed, oblivious. Down the hill, a delivery wagon barreled forward, the driver yelling, reins flailing. The horses were spooked, veering out of control. Everything slowed. Elira dropped her basket. She did not think. She ran. The child had almost reached the center of the road when Elira lunged, arms outstretched. She caught him by the middle, twisting her body to shield him as they tumbled down into the shallow drainage ditch. The wagon thundered past just inches away, splinters of dirt flying into the air. Then, silence. Elira's breath came in sharp gasps. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, knees scraped, palms bleeding from the fall, but her arms stayed locked around the boy. He cried softly into her shoulder, stunned but unharmed. She rocked him gently, lips pressed to his hair. "It's all right," she whispered. "You're safe. Mama's got you now. Shh. Mama's here." She didn't even realize she was saying it. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere older than memory. Her voice cracked with something fierce and tender all at once. By the time the boy's mother reached them, crying and breathless, Elira hadn't moved. The woman knelt down beside them, hands trembling. "Oh God, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, my baby." But she stopped short as she looked at Elira's face. There was something in her eyes that startled the woman into silence, a sorrow too big for the moment. Elira finally looked up. "He's fine," she said softly, handing the boy over, brushing back his hair with shaking fingers. "Just hold him tight." The mother took the child in her arms and backed away slowly, still watching Elira like someone who'd just seen a stranger cry in their own language. Jonas had been across the street the entire time. He hadn't moved when she ran. He hadn't called out. He had only watched, arms at his sides, jaw clenched. That night, the house was quiet. Elira said nothing during supper. She kept her eyes on her plate, and when she finished, she excused herself early. When she reached her room, she stopped. There, just in front of the doorframe, sat a small wooden doll, roughly carved but carefully shaped, with 2 button eyes and a painted smile. Elira stared at it, breath catching in her throat. There was no note, no explanation, but somehow it spoke louder than any words. She bent down, picked it up slowly. Her fingers curled around the figure as if it might slip away, and then she sat on the edge of her bed, the doll in her lap, and leaned forward until her forehead touched the mattress. No sobs, no sound. Just a silent collapse into grief that had waited far too long to be felt. Because it was true. She had spent months trying not to want it anymore. The dream that had been called shameful, impossible, barren. But today, holding that little boy, she remembered. She remembered what it felt like to love something small and fragile, to want to protect it with everything she had. And now, holding the doll Jonas had carved, she knew he had seen it too. Not just the fear, but the longing. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if that scared her more or gave her hope. The wind was harsh the next time they went into town, the kind that pulled at skirts and dried the corners of your eyes. Elira walked slightly behind Jonas, as always, her basket light, her shoulders straighter than weeks before. She thought she was invisible. Until she heard them. 2 women outside the apothecary, bent over bolts of fabric, their voices low but pointed. "You hear about that drunk last week? What about him?" Said something ugly about Jonas's wife, called her barren trash. Next thing, his lips split and his teeth are on the floor. The other woman laughed, then whispered, "Quiet one, that Jonas, but I guess even a quiet man's got a limit when it comes to his own." Elira's feet stopped moving. She didn't turn around, didn't breathe. She thought of the bruise on Jonas's knuckle last week, the way he flexed his hand when he thought she wasn't looking. The new cut on his forearm that he brushed off as just fence work. And suddenly, it all made sense. The way he always stepped between her and strangers. The way he stood a little closer in town. The way his hand had twitched toward his belt when someone stared too long. He had never told her, never asked for thanks. He had just stood there, like a wall. That night, after the chores, she sat by the window and watched him stack feed sacks into the barn. One arm still bandaged, moving slower than usual, but steady, always steady. She bit her lip. She had spent so long being watched like she was broken, passed around like she was dead. But Jonas, he had never asked what was wrong with her, never tried to fix her, never treated her like she needed proving. When a ranch hand down the road asked him once, over whiskey and poker, "What's so special about that quiet little wife of yours?" Jonas didn't blink, just looked out toward the pasture, fingers wrapped around his glass. "She makes bread that bites back," he said finally. "I like that. Means it's real, and I ain't hungry for anyone else's." The hand had laughed. But Jonas hadn't. The next morning, Elira found herself alone in the kitchen. The bread she had made yesterday, hard on the edges, too much flour, still sat on the counter. She hesitated, then cut one thick slice, poured a touch of honey over it, and on a small scrap of paper she wrote, "Even the tough ones get eaten, because they're real." She folded the note and left it beside the bread at Jonas's place at the table, Then she went to bed. No word, no sound. The next morning she found the plate empty, and the note was gone. Jonas didn't say anything, but when she handed him his coffee, she saw it, the smallest, rarest thing she had ever seen on his face. A smile. Not the kind he gave the horses, not the polite nod he used for store clerks. This one crinkled the corners of his eyes. It reached past the fence he always kept up. And for the first time, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a piece of the wall she'd built inside herself, finally cracking. And in that soft, silent moment, the ranch felt less like a place she'd been sent to, and more like a place she had begun to belong. The wind had warmed. Spring was just beginning to show itself on the ranch, buds on the trees, the scent of damp soil, the sound of calves testing their legs in the morning light. Alira moved slower these days. At first, she thought it was just the weather, then maybe lack of sleep. She blamed the headaches on sun, the nausea on bad stew, but nothing explained the heaviness in her chest, the way the world tilted when she stood too fast, the ache in her lower back, the flutter in her stomach that felt foreign. She said nothing. Until the morning she nearly fainted while hanging laundry. Jonas caught her just before she collapsed. He did not ask if she was all right. He only wrapped her shawl tighter and led her to the wagon. "We're going," he said gently, "just to be sure." Alira tried to argue. She hated the idea of being fussed over, hated doctors, white rooms, the scent of alcohol that reminded her of fertility clinics and cold stethoscopes. But Jonas didn't pressure her. He held the reins, quiet and steady, humming a tune under his breath. The doctor in town was a kind man, mid-40s, graying beard, and soft-spoken. He listened carefully, asked questions without judgment. Then he pressed gently on her stomach, listened with a device Alira didn't recognize, and after a few moments, looked up with a smile. "You're not sick, Mrs. Halden," he said, eyes kind. "You're with child." Silence. Alira blinked, then blinked again. I'm what?" "Pregnant. About 8 weeks, if I had to guess." She stared at him like he'd spoken another language. Something in her cracked. Tears welled up, uninvited. But she wasn't smiling. She wasn't beaming or laughing or glowing like women in stories. She was shaking. Because it wasn't joy that gripped her. It was fear. The voice came back, her old mother-in-law, spitting like venom in her ears. "You'll never carry life. You're broken. A waste." Alira covered her mouth. The room spun. Jonas moved closer, but not too close. He knelt beside the table, one hand resting lightly on hers. "It's all right," he said softly. "You don't have to say anything." She shook her head. "I don't understand. What if it's a mistake? What if it's not real?" He met her eyes. "Then we face it. If it is real, we welcome it. If it isn't, I stay." She looked at him, really looked. For the first time she saw the depth behind his silence, the patience, the way he never reached unless she reached first. "But what if I lose it?" she whispered. Jonas's thumb brushed her knuckle. "Then we grieve, together." She started to cry in earnest then, not the kind of crying that came from old wounds, but the kind that came from being seen. He didn't smile wide, didn't laugh or lift her off her feet. He simply held her hand, warm and steady. "If you can't believe it yet," he said gently, "then let me believe for both of us, just until you're ready." That broke her. Not in the way she feared, but in the way a wall crumbles when sunlight finally touches stone. She leaned forward, slow, unsure, and rested her head on his shoulder. He did not flinch. He turned just slightly, enough to let her fit there. Her arms stayed in her lap, but her heart, for the first time, leaned too. She didn't say thank you, didn't need to. And in the soft hum of the doctor's office, in that quiet, unremarkable room, the woman once called barren held the tiniest flicker of life inside her. And for the first time she did not feel cursed. She felt possible. Not for the world, but for herself, and for the man who never once asked her to prove anything at all. The sky was heavy with clouds when they came. A wagon, freshly scrubbed but with a crack in the back wheel, rolled up the Halden ranch with too much speed. Dust followed it like gossip, and behind it trailed two more horses, one bearing a man Elira recognized with a jolt to her ribs. Marlon, her ex-husband. And beside him, his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Trask, in their Sunday coats, faces pinched, like they smelled something sour. Jonas was tending the horses when they arrived. He looked up once, then went back to brushing the mare. Elira stood on the porch, her hands gripped the railing, knuckles white. Mrs. Trask was first to speak, sharp and cutting. "So, this is where you've been hiding, spreading lies." Elira said nothing. Marlon wouldn't meet her eyes. He looked thinner, less like a man, and more like someone trying too hard to look like one. Mr. Trask puffed his chest. "We've heard the talk. That she's with child. That's impossible. This girl is barren. Always was. This pregnancy nonsense, it's a stunt. A way to save face." Mrs. Trask sneered. "Or maybe the rancher wants to believe in miracles. She tricked him, just like she tricked us." People from nearby farms began to arrive, drawn by the noise, the shouting. They gathered at the gate, whispering, "That's Elira's old in-laws. Didn't they say she couldn't?" Jonas stepped forward then, calm, not rushed. He did not raise his voice. He held something in his hand, a folded piece of paper. He stopped in front of the Trasks and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "This is a diagnosis from Dr. Rourke," he said. "It confirms Elira is pregnant, nearly 3 months." He let the words settle. Then he looked at Mrs. Trask. "The woman you called useless, a disgrace, the one you returned like spoiled meat, is carrying life." His eyes flicked to Marlon, who still hadn't spoken. "You blamed her, shamed her, called her broken, but maybe it wasn't her." He stepped back once, giving space. Maybe the man was the one who could not bear. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Trask went red, then pale. Mr. Trask opened his mouth, closed it again. Marlon's jaw tensed, but he said nothing, still staring at the ground like it might open and swallow him. No one moved. No one cheered. But something in the silence cracked. The Trasks turned and climbed back into their wagon. No apology, no words. They left in a cloud of dust smaller than the one they'd arrived with. Jonas walked back to the stable. Elira hadn't moved. She felt still, not victorious, not smug, just released. The weight was no longer on her shoulders. It was now where it belonged. A few days later, word spread quietly. Marlon's new wife, married nearly 2 years, still wasn't pregnant. Some said it was nerves, others blamed the weather, but more and more began to whisper, "What if it was never the women? What if it was him?" And just like that, the tide turned. Elira, who had been the subject of so much whispered cruelty, now walked through town with her chin higher, not out of pride, but because she finally could. She never needed to throw stones, never needed to shout her worth. She had Jonas, she had a child on the way, and she had peace. And sometimes, that was the best kind of justice. To live so well, those who once cursed you have to sit in the shadow of your joy. The scent of roasted meat and warm bread drifted across the Halden ranch. Lanterns swung gently from porch beams and fence posts, casting soft pools of golden light. Tables had been set under the open sky, covered in simple linens and laid with food that came from the land. Squash, sweet potatoes, apple tarts still steaming. It was the harvest gathering. Jonas had invited the whole town. And they came. Old men with worn boots, mothers balancing babies, couples who once whispered behind Elira's back. They were all there now, offering pies and shaking her hand. No one called her broken anymore. They called her Miss Halden or the rancher's wife. They asked after the baby with sincere smiles, offered to bring soup or cloth when the time came. Elira stood beside Jonas, her belly round beneath a pale blue dress, the fabric soft over her skin. She no longer tried to hide it. Her hands rested over the child like a prayer she finally believed in. As twilight deepened, Jonas rose from his seat. He lifted his glass and cleared his throat. Conversations hushed. All eyes turned to him. He looked at Elira, not at the crowd. "Folks around here like to say I married to pay off a debt," he said evenly. "That I got a wife when I needed a hand on the ranch." A few chuckles rippled. He didn't smile. "Truth is, I got the better end of that deal. I got someone braver than me, kinder, and more stubborn than a winter storm." Laughter now, warmer. He glanced around. "So, tonight, I don't make a speech. I just say thanks to her." He turned to Elira, and, slowly, knelt. But not on both knees, not with a ring. Just one knee, one hand on his heart. His voice was low, private despite the crowd. "If you've ever thought about who you'd want beside you, for all your